Man bought an abandoned mansion for a very cheap price, but what he found inside changed his future. The small town of Evershade sat quietly at the edge of a dense forest. Most of its streets were lined with simple houses and local shops. People knew each other by name. Life moved slowly. But on the far side of town, hidden by tall trees and thick vines, there was a place that few people talked about. It was the Thornwood Estate. The mansion had once been the pride of the town. Long ago, it belonged to the Thornwood family, one of the richest families in the area. The house had many rooms, tall towers, and wide windows that once let in warm sunlight. But after something happened, something no one ever clearly explained, the family was never seen again. The mansion was left behind, empty and silent. For over 40 years, no one lived there. The garden turned into a jungle of weeds. The roof began to fall apart. The windows broke one by one. Some people said the place was haunted. Others just saw it as a sad, forgotten building. No one wanted to go near it. No one except Daniel. Daniel was a carpenter. He had spent many years building houses, fixing furniture, and working with wood. He was good at what he did, but times were hard. Work had slowed down. Money was tight. He needed something new, something big. When he heard that the old Thornwood estate was up for sale at a very low price, he didn't waste time. Most people would have walked away. But Daniel didn't see a haunted house. He saw a chance. The mansion needed work, yes, but it still had strong walls. The structure was solid. It had charm. He believed he could fix it. He believed he could make it beautiful again. Daniel packed his tools and moved into a small camper near the property. He stood outside the mansion on his first day and looked up at the tall, broken towers. Vines crawled up the walls. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. The stone steps were cracked and moss-covered. But he wasn't afraid. He was ready to begin. He started with the outside. He cleared away the weeds and overgrown plants. He picked up broken pieces of stone and wood. He wanted to see the shape of the building clearly. Every piece he touched made him think of how the place must have looked long ago. As he worked, neighbors walked by and stared. Some shook their heads. Some whispered. But Daniel kept going. Once the outside was a little more manageable, Daniel walked into the house. The air was heavy with dust. Cobwebs hung from the ceilings. The wooden floor creaked with every step. Pieces of furniture were still there, but they were covered in thick layers of dirt and grime. The walls had faded wallpaper peeling off. The chandelier above the grand hall had fallen and shattered on the ground. Still, Daniel felt something special. The mansion had been sleeping for decades, but it wasn't dead. It was waiting. He walked from room to room, making notes about what needed to be repaired. Some parts of the floor were weak. Some doors wouldn't open. The kitchen was full of old dishes and broken cabinets. The staircase was crooked, and one step was missing completely. But the mansion had good bones. That's what Daniel kept telling himself. It would take time, but he could do it. He would clean, fix, and bring the old house back to life. It would be his home. He didn't have a family of his own. He had no one waiting for him. But this place could be a new start, a place where he could finally feel settled. At night, he would sit outside his camper and look at the building. The wind would blow through the trees, and the old windows would rattle slightly. Owls would hoot in the distance. Most people would find it eerie, but Daniel found it peaceful. It was quiet. It was his. He didn't know much about the Thornwood family. The papers had little information, just that they had been rich, lived there for generations, and then suddenly vanished. People in town were tight-lipped. When he asked around, he mostly got short answers or awkward silence. One old man told him to leave it alone. But Daniel wasn't interested in stories. He was only interested in the work. Every day, Daniel cleaned and repaired what he could. He made piles for what could be saved and what had to be thrown out. He brought in wood, paint, and tools. Slowly, the mansion started to look less like a haunted house and more like a forgotten castle waking up after a long sleep. He spent his mornings in the upper rooms, letting the light in through freshly cleaned windows. He spent afternoons clearing out the lower floors. He planned to take on the basement last. It looked dark and unstable, and he didn't want to risk injury before he had fixed up the rest. But even as he worked hard and focused on the task in front of him, something about the house lingered in his mind. It wasn't just old. It felt heavy, like it was holding on to something. Daniel didn't believe in ghosts or curses, but he did believe that old places held stories. And this one had been silent for too long. For now, he focused on his goal, to bring life back to Thornwood Estate, and to himself. After a week of cleaning and fixing the upper floors, Daniel decided it was time to check the basement. He had been putting it off. The stairs leading down were narrow and uneven. The air near the basement door felt colder than the rest of the house. Still, he needed to know what was down there. He grabbed a flashlight and slowly walked down the steps. Each one creaked under his weight. Dust floated in the beam of his light. The air smelled musty and old. The walls were damp. Some pipes hung low from the ceiling, dripping water every few minutes. The space was large, but most of it was empty. Just a few broken shelves and some old tools were scattered around. As he walked further in, he noticed something odd. One of the basement walls looked different from the others. It was smoother and newer. The color of the bricks didn't match. The mortar lines were sharper, as if they had not aged like the rest. He tapped on the wall. The sound was hollow. He knocked again. It didn't sound solid like the others. He looked closer and saw that the bricks weren't joined as tightly. Some of them had small gaps. It almost looked like it had been built to cover something, not to hold weight. Daniel stepped back and thought. It didn't make sense. Why would someone build a false wall in a basement no one had entered in decades? He decided to investigate. He went back upstairs, brought down a chisel, a hammer, and a few more tools. Then he began working on the odd wall. He chipped away at the bricks slowly. Dust filled the air as small pieces broke off. After some effort, a large section of the wall began to crumble. Behind it was darkness. When enough bricks had fallen, he saw something more: wood. A door. It was hidden behind the wall. The wood was dark, nearly black, and covered in cobwebs. The handle was metal, rusted and cold. Strange symbols had been carved into the surface. Circles, lines, and shapes he didn't recognize. Some looked almost like letters, but none he could read. The door looked old, older than the house itself. It didn't match the rest of the basement. He reached out and touched it. The surface was rough. The air around the door felt cooler. He tried pulling the handle. At first, it didn't move. Then he used a tool to pry it open. Slowly, with a loud creak, the door gave way. Inside was another room, a hidden one. It was small and square, built of stone blocks. The air inside was thick and still. His flashlight flickered as he stepped inside. The walls were bare, and the ceiling was low. In the middle of the room, resting on a raised stone platform, was a chest. The chest was unlike anything he had seen. It was large, about the size of a small table. Its surface was covered in gold patterns. The edges were lined with metal that looked almost untouched by time. The designs were sharp, clean, and beautiful. Some parts of the chest looked like they had been melted or sealed with heat. Daniel circled around it, shining his light across its surface. The chest didn't have a lock. Just a simple latch held it shut. He noticed more symbols on the chest, similar to the ones on the door. Some were carved deeply, others lightly scratched into the gold. They looked old, worn down by time, but still clear. He didn't open it yet. First, he looked around the rest of the room. The floor was covered in dust, but he saw no footprints, no signs that anyone had entered in years. The walls were plain, without shelves or writing, just stone and silence. It was as if the chest had been placed there for a reason, and nothing else was meant to be there. There were no signs of animals or water damage. The room was sealed well. That explained the heavy air. No wind had passed through in decades. The silence was complete. Even the sound from upstairs could not be heard. It felt like the room was cut off from the rest of the house, and maybe even from the rest of the world. Daniel stood there, staring at the chest. He felt drawn to it. It seemed out of place, like it didn't belong in a house at all. It belonged in a museum or maybe a tomb. He didn't understand what he had found, but he knew it was important. Still, it was just a chest. It was real. It was there, and he had found it. He slowly reached out, touched the latch, and gently lifted the lid. The lid of the chest opened with a slow creak. A soft cloud of dust rose into the air. Daniel leaned forward and aimed his flashlight inside. What he saw made his heart race. The chest was filled with coins. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They were old and covered in a faint layer of dirt, but many still shined. Some were stacked. Others were spread out, as if they had been thrown in quickly. The coins were unlike any Daniel had seen before. They were thick and heavy. Some had strange faces on them, while others had markings he didn't recognize. They looked old, very old. Some were gold, others were silver. A few had edges worn smooth, while others still showed sharp details. The light from his flashlight made the coins sparkle inside the dark room. Daniel picked up one of the coins. It felt solid in his hand. He turned it over, studying the symbols on it. He didn't know where it was from or how much it was worth, but it looked valuable. It didn't look like something anyone would leave behind by accident. He placed it back into the chest and began carefully examining more. As he shifted some of the coins, something underneath caught his eye. It was a piece of paper, folded and torn. The edges were dry and crumbling. Daniel gently moved the coins aside and picked up the paper. It was stained with something dark. Parts of it were stuck together. As he unfolded it, small flakes of the paper broke off. It was a note. The handwriting was messy, and some words had faded over time. The ink had run in several places, as if the paper had gotten wet or smeared by a shaking hand. But the most disturbing part was the stains. Dark red patches spread across the page. It looked like blood. Daniel squinted and tried to read what was left. Many words were missing, but a few stood out clearly. One was betrayal. Another was curse. There were also broken phrases like "they trusted me," and "this is the price." The rest was too damaged to understand. The words were spread across the page in a way that made the note feel rushed and desperate. He held the note in his hand for a while, unsure what to think. It was clear something terrible had happened. The words didn't sound like a joke. The blood wasn't fake. The message came from someone who had been scared or in pain. But Daniel didn't know who wrote it or why it was hidden in a chest full of coins. Still, his eyes kept going back to the treasure. The coins were real. They were old. They looked like they could be worth a lot of money. The note was strange and unsettling, but it was just a piece of paper. The coins were something he could touch and sell. He placed the note back into the chest, beneath the coins, and closed the lid. Daniel spent the rest of the day cleaning the chest and organizing the coins. He brought them upstairs in small batches. He washed the dirt off some of them with care, using soft cloths and warm water. The shine returned quickly. He lined them up on a table and counted them. There were more than he had expected. He had never dealt with items like this before, but he knew they had value. He guessed they were from another time, maybe from another country. Some had numbers on them. Others had pictures of castles, lions, or strange patterns. He made sure to keep the chest hidden and locked the basement door behind him each time he left. As the sun went down, Daniel sat in the dim light of the kitchen and stared at the coins. He thought about what to do next. He could keep them. He could sell them. He could try to find out where they came from. But one thing was certain. This discovery could change everything for him. He didn't think much about the note again that night. The words were strange, yes, but they felt like something from the past. A bad memory locked away. He was more focused on the future now. The coins could pay off his debts. They could help him finish fixing the house. They could give him a new life. He stored the coins carefully and made a plan to look for someone who could tell him more about them. Maybe an expert. Maybe a collector. Someone who would understand their worth. Daniel didn't know what the symbols meant. He didn't know who wrote the note or why it was hidden. But he believed the coins were real treasure. He believed he had found something people only dream of. He didn't feel afraid. He felt lucky. He went to sleep that night thinking about all the ways his life could finally get better. After cleaning and sorting the coins, Daniel wanted to find out how much they were worth. He didn't want to go to a regular pawn shop. He knew the coins were rare. He needed someone who understood old items and antiques. So he searched online for collectors who bought historical coins. After some time, he found one who seemed interested. The collector had a small office in a nearby city. His website said he dealt in old coins, rare artifacts, and family treasures. Daniel sent a message with pictures of some of the coins. He didn't say where he found them. He just asked if the man would be willing to take a look. The response came quickly. The collector said the coins were valuable and that he would like to meet. He seemed excited. Daniel packed a small box with a few of the shiniest coins and traveled to the city the next day. He arrived at the office building in the afternoon. It was quiet with only a few people around. The collector greeted him and brought him into a private room. The space was filled with glass cases holding old watches, medals, and coins. It looked clean and professional. Daniel placed the box on the table and opened it. The man leaned in and stared at the coins for a long time. He didn't speak at first. He picked up one of the gold coins and turned it over in his hand. Then he looked at the others. His expression changed as he studied them. His hands moved slowly, and his eyes narrowed. He asked where Daniel had gotten them. Daniel gave a vague answer. He said they came from an old house he was working on. He avoided giving details. The collector nodded, but kept looking at Daniel. Then he asked if Daniel had found anything else with the coins, like papers, letters, or objects. He seemed less interested in the coins and more focused on where they had been. Daniel said no more than he had to. He didn't mention the chest or the note. The man kept asking questions. He wanted to know the location of the house. He asked if the property had been owned by a wealthy family. He asked if Daniel had told anyone else about the coins. The questions didn't feel normal. They felt sharp, like the man was digging for something deeper. Daniel grew uncomfortable. He tried to stay calm, but inside, he was unsure. Something didn't feel right. Still, he had come to sell, and the man was offering good money. The collector offered to buy a few of the coins. He placed a stack of bills on the table. It was more money than Daniel had seen in a long time. He accepted it, shook hands, and packed up the rest of the coins. The collector asked if Daniel would bring more in the future. Daniel said he would think about it. He left the building and walked back to his car. The streets were quiet, but his mind was busy. The meeting had not gone how he expected. The man had been polite, but his questions had felt too personal. His eyes had seemed too focused, too knowing. Daniel had planned to sell the coins and move on, but now he felt watched. He got into his car and looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing seemed unusual, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The money was real. The coins were valuable. But the look on the collector's face had made him uneasy. It was not the look of someone surprised. It was the look of someone who recognized something. Daniel drove back to his town. He took the long way home, unsure why. He checked his mirrors more than usual. He kept thinking about the questions. The collector hadn't acted like a normal buyer. It was like he knew a story that Daniel didn't. A story connected to the coins. A story Daniel had not been told. Back at the mansion, Daniel placed the rest of the coins in a safe place. He sat down and counted the money again. It was enough to fix several parts of the house. It could help him in many ways. But he didn't feel excited. He felt cautious. He wondered if meeting the collector had been a mistake. The day had started with hope. It had ended with questions. Daniel had found something valuable, yes. But he had also found something else, attention. Someone now knew what he had, and that someone wanted to know more. Daniel returned home from his city late in the afternoon. The sky was cloudy, and the streets were mostly empty. He felt tired, but he also felt uneasy. The meeting with the coin collector had left him with a strange feeling. The man's questions still echoed in his mind. He had not said anything wrong, but something about his interest had felt too strong. As Daniel walked toward the parking lot after the meeting, he had noticed something strange. A black car was parked across the street. Two men sat inside. They wore dark suits and sunglasses. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They just watched. Daniel thought it was just a coincidence and kept walking. On his drive home, he checked his mirrors often. At first, the roads were clear, but after a few minutes, he saw a dark car a few lengths behind him. It stayed back but never turned away. He took a few different turns, hoping it would disappear. But each time he looked, the car was still there. When he reached the edge of his town, the car finally turned in another direction. Daniel felt a bit more relaxed. But that feeling didn't last long. The next morning, Daniel left his house to buy supplies. As he stepped outside, he saw a man standing across the street. He wore a black suit and dark sunglasses. He didn't move or speak. He just stood there, facing Daniel. After a minute, the man walked away, turning down a side street. Daniel felt the same uneasy feeling return. Later that day, Daniel went into town again. This time, he walked instead of driving. He visited a hardware store and a small market. As he moved through the streets, he noticed two men following him. They kept their distance, but never broke their pattern. When he stopped, they stopped. When he crossed the street, they did too. He changed directions several times. He walked into different shops and came back out quickly. The men never approached him, but they never went away either. Their presence was quiet but clear. Daniel began to feel trapped. He didn't know who they were or what they wanted. By the time he reached the edge of the town square, the sun was starting to go down. He felt a chill in the air. He picked up his pace and tried to act normal. But inside, he was nervous. He felt watched. He felt hunted. He didn't go back home right away. He changed his route and took a longer path, walking through side streets and empty alleys. He looked over his shoulder again and again. The men stayed close. They never ran, but they were always near. Finally, Daniel made a choice. He walked to the police station. The building was small, but well lit. He walked inside and asked to speak with someone. He sat down with an officer and began to explain what had happened. He told them about the coins, the strange room in the house, and the men who had been following him. He showed them the few remaining coins he still had. He said he was afraid. The police took his words seriously. They asked for details. They made notes. They looked at the coins carefully and said they would begin an investigation. They kept the coins for examination and asked Daniel to be careful. They also promised to keep an eye on the area around his home. Daniel left the police station feeling a little better. He didn't know if the danger was over, but at least now someone else knew. He had handed over the coins, hoping it would take away some of the risk. He didn't want to be chased anymore. He didn't want to live in fear. When he returned home that night, the streets were quiet. No cars were parked nearby. No men stood on the corners. But Daniel didn't feel safe. He locked his doors and checked the windows. He moved carefully through the house, listening for any sound. Every creak of the floor made him stop and hold his breath. That night, sleep didn't come easily. He kept thinking about the men in suits. He wondered who they were and how they had found him so quickly. He also thought about the coins. Maybe they were more than just money. Maybe they carried something else with them, something old, something dangerous. Daniel stayed inside the house the next day. He waited to hear from the police. He hoped they would find answers. He hoped the men in black would stop following him. He had only wanted to restore a house and start a new life. Now he was caught in something he didn't understand. After Daniel gave the coins to the police, they began their work. The coins were not like anything they had seen before. Some officers thought they were just old and valuable. Others believed there might be more to the story. The bloodstained note Daniel had found was also sent for testing. It was fragile, but parts of it were still readable. Experts were brought in to look at the coins. They studied the metal, the symbols, and the dates. The coins were not from one place. They were from several countries. Some are over 100 years old. A few have been part of royal collections. These were not coins that someone would lose or forget. These were treasures that people would protect. The note raised more questions. The red stains were tested and confirmed to be real blood. The writing was old, and the ink had faded. But some words stood out. The note spoke of betrayal. It mentioned a curse. There were lines about trust being broken and lives being lost. The message was not clear, but it was dark. The police looked into the history of the mansion. They searched public records, library archives, and old newspapers. It took time, but slowly the pieces started to come together. The Thornwood family had once been one of the richest families in the area. They had owned land, businesses, and art. Their mansion had been the center of many events and gatherings. Then, without warning, the family disappeared. Old newspapers from more than 40 years ago showed that the disappearance had been strange. The story had not made headlines. Just small articles with missing person notices. There were no signs of a break-in. No bodies were found. No one knew what had happened. The mansion had been locked, and the family was gone. One article mentioned a private family matter. Another mentioned that some believed the family had left the country, but none of it was confirmed. The case had gone cold. People stopped talking. The house was left to rot. Over time, the story faded from memory. Now, with the coins and the note, the story came back. Police looked deeper. They found letters written by a lawyer who had once worked for the Thornwoods. In one letter, he spoke about a large amount of gold and silver being moved into the mansion just weeks before the family vanished. He said it was meant for safekeeping. He also said there had been fights between family members during that time. Another document, found in a government office, listed a will that had never been completed. The will named 3 family members. But only one of them had legal control over the property. That person was never found. The others were believed to have died or disappeared. No one had followed up. The pieces now made more sense. The coins in the chest had likely been stolen from the family's own collection. The note was likely written by someone inside the house, someone who had seen what happened. The betrayal mentioned in the message could have been between family members. One of them may have taken everything and hidden it in the basement. The hidden room added to the mystery. It had not been part of the house plans. It was built secretly, likely by someone who knew the house well. The strange door, the symbols, and the sealed wall all showed someone wanted the chest hidden for a long time. The police started to believe that the disappearance of the Thornwood family had not been an accident. It had been a crime, a quiet one, hidden from the public, buried in the house. The person who wrote the note may have been the last to know the truth. The truth had stayed inside that room, locked away, until Daniel broke through the wall. Now the case was reopened. The police filed reports, informed historical groups, and notified the town council. People who had once worked for the family were contacted. A few were still alive. One old woman said she remembered a night long ago when the mansion had gone dark and quiet. She had heard shouting, then silence, then nothing. With this new information, the story of the Thornwood family changed. It was no longer just a mystery. It was a puzzle being solved. The coins were part of the missing fortune. The note was a voice from the past. And the hidden room was a secret meant to stay buried. The truth was not full, but it was enough to see that something had gone very wrong. The family had been broken by greed and lies. And now, many years later, their story was finally being told. The police worked hard to finish the case. They gathered all the information. They followed every clue. The coins, the note, and the mansion told a full story. What was once a quiet mystery had become a real case. It was no longer just about old coins. It was about truth, secrets, and justice. The men in black suits were tracked down. The police found out they were not from the government or any official group. They were treasure hunters. They had spent years looking for lost riches. When news of rare coins began to spread, they followed the trail. They wanted to find the rest of the treasure before anyone else could. They had no right to it. They only wanted money. These men had been watching Daniel. They had hoped he would lead them to more. But Daniel had gone to the police. He had told the truth. Because of this, the men were caught. They were questioned. They were found guilty of following and threatening an innocent person. They had broken the law. They would face punishment. The coins were taken in as evidence. Experts confirmed their age and value. Many of them were linked to the Thornwood family. Old records showed the family once owned pieces just like them. Some even matched coins seen in photos from the past. The connection was clear. These coins belonged to the Thornwoods. The note helped too. It showed there had been betrayal. It gave meaning to the hidden room and the missing family. It was a message from someone close to the truth. It was proof that something dark had happened in the mansion long ago. The case was shared with higher authorities. Historians, legal experts, and local officials reviewed it. They agreed that the coins had to be returned to the state. Since no direct family member could be found, the treasure would be handled by the government. It would not go to treasure hunters. It would not be sold in secret. It would be protected. The story began to spread. Local news stations picked it up. Then larger ones followed. People were interested. A man had bought a forgotten house and uncovered a mystery. The town of Evershade, once quiet and unknown, was now in the spotlight. Visitors came to see the mansion. Reporters wanted to speak with Daniel. Daniel's life changed. He had not planned to become known. He had only wanted to fix a house. But now people knew his name. They praised him for doing the right thing. They thanked him for bringing the past into the light. He was seen as brave and honest. Daniel did not become rich. He did not keep the treasure. But he found something else: peace. The strange eyes following him were gone. The coins were no longer hidden. The truth had been told. The mansion no longer felt like a place of silence. It felt like a place where the truth had finally come out. The town saw him in a new way. People who once whispered about the mansion now respected him. Some offered help. Some brought him food or supplies. Others asked for advice. The house became more than just an old building. It became a symbol of history, truth, and courage. Daniel continued to work on the mansion. He fixed the roof. He repaired the stairs. He cleaned the walls and windows. Each day, he felt more at home. The house was no longer hiding secrets. It was open. It was alive again. The police closed the case with care. They wrote full reports. They made sure everything was clear. The truth was now in public records. The coins were sent to museums and safe places. The note was kept in an archive. It would be studied and remembered. Years later, people would still talk about what happened. They would visit the mansion and ask about the hidden room. They would remember the man who found the treasure but chose the truth. Daniel became part of the town's story. His name would not be forgotten. He had not searched for fame. He had not asked for trouble. But he faced it. And in the end, he helped uncover something important. He gave voice to the past. He gave the story a real ending. Justice was served. The treasure was returned. And Daniel, though not richer in money, became richer in something far greater: honor, peace, and a place to call home.